Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. And today, I'm talking about Apple Watch, specifically the Apple Watch 9 or 10. It's not carbon neutral, despite what Apple says. And hear me out here, because I want to go through the evidence, and we had some new interesting reporting coming out today at TechCrunch. Thank you, Tim DeChant. But we're going to go beyond that and really get into the nuts and bolts of what the real issue is here. But here's what's happening with Apple's Watch 9 and Watch 10. About 2 years ago, if you recall and you're paying attention to these things, Apple announced that its Watch Series 9, the first one, would basically be carbon neutral, the first carbon neutral product that Apple has ever produced. So essentially from cradle to grave, according to Apple, the manufacturing, use, and disposal of that new model, the Watch 9 back then, would not contribute, or rather did not contribute as well, to global warming. But here's the thing. A German court literally just said that Apple has to recant that claim. So here's what's happening. Each aluminum Apple Watch Series 9 and also Series 10, those are the two models with that designation of carbon neutral, are generating about 8 kilograms of carbon emissions from cradle to grave. So Apple then offsets those emissions through the purchase of carbon credits. The German environmental group, I'm just going to call them DUH because I know how to say Deutsche and I'm not about to pronounce that other word, but that environmental group, DUH, brought a lawsuit in German court against Apple. And so Apple responded, and a spokesperson talking to TechCrunch said via email, and I quote, "The court has broadly upheld our rigorous approach to carbon neutrality. We remain laser-focused on further reducing emissions by industry-leading innovation in clean energy, low-carbon design, and more. Work that has put us on track to achieve carbon neutrality through our entire supply chain by 2030, end quote. And for the record, I'm happy they're going carbon neutral, at least trying. You know, it's a good effort to try, but you can't really make these claims. And so let's get specific here. First about this ruling, because a panel of German judges zeroed in on the nature of Apple's carbon credits. And for the record, this stems from the planting of eucalyptus trees in the country of Paraguay. So 3/4 of that project area where they're planting these trees falls on leased land, and that lease ends in 2029, just a few years from now. So the court said the short timeline undermined Apple's carbon neutral claims, and they run afoul of German competition law. So consumers might reasonably expect that forests used in carbon neutral projects today would remain standing in 2050 and beyond, since the Paris Agreement that most of the world is basically trying to abide to calls for a cessation of carbon emissions in the latter half of this century. Quote, "Consumers would therefore assume that CO2 compensation is secured for the advertised Apple Watch until about 2050, end quote. That's why a German court basically says Apple needs to recant this. Apple obviously taking a different position, but here's the thing, and basically, without these longer term leases, it's possible that the plantations would be cut down, undermining the carbon neutrality of any credits sold against them. So what this really revolves around is not the production process of the Apple Watch, which I hope is basically more clean than it has been in the past for the 9 and 10, but it really comes down to the efficacy of carbon credits. And carbon credits, in my opinion, seem like a losing battle in the long run, not just for Apple, but for any organization or corporation that's using them. So think about it this way. Carbon credits can incentivize short-term offsets, but they don't fundamentally address the root problem, which I think is the continuous extraction and consumption of finite resources all around the planet. So planting trees or funding renewable projects helps slow that impact, but ecosystems can't absorb so much carbon, and carbon sink, neutral carbon sinks take decades to mature. This is one of the big issues here. We are consuming more and more and more because meanwhile, industrial activity keeps emitting at a pace that far outstrips what the offsets can realistically balance. So by virtue of that, we are basically creating and producing more and more and more and more, and we're not planting enough trees basically to keep up with that. And even then, that's a losing battle in the long run. So Apple's claims, in my opinion, about the Watch 9 and 10 rest on a multi-step strategy via Apple themselves from their website and also reported by The Verge. I did my homework on this. So Apple says they will reduce emissions via a 100% renewable electricity manufacturing and device usage, at least 30% recycled or renewable materials by weight, at least 50% of shipping via lower carbon methods like ocean freight, and on top of that, also offset remaining emissions, about that 8 kilograms I talked about earlier per watch, using a, quote, high quality, end quote, carbon credit from nature-based projects like planting those trees in South America. So the question really becomes, can Apple Watch 9 or 10, because forget 8 and below, can it truly be carbon neutral? And my answer? I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that it is. And while Apple, to their credit, has made serious efforts to reduce emissions, the reliance on offset credits, especially from projects with insecure lease agreements and ecological concerns, means the carbon neutral claim lacks the long-term robustness required to be credible. This is a huge issue. And quite frankly, again, this is not just an Apple thing. This is a long-term longitudinal issue that we are seeing across the world. The more we are extracting rare earth elements, and they're rare for a reason, like gold, it's a finite amount, means we have to dig deeper, harder, explore more, et cetera, which does local and potential global environmental impacts to these things. And offsetting it by planting a few trees really isn't going to cut it. And so I think this really requires going back to the drawing board and rethinking this, not to mention the utter amount of e-waste we have that isn't recycled as well. So take it for what it's worth, but quite frankly, I'm in agreement with the German court. I don't think Apple can claim this. And so if you're an Apple Watch 9 or 10 user, you can't say you haven't been told. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private, informed, and secure. Take care.